My name is Indigo Faye Hollister, and I'm 28 years old. 10 years ago, my sister told my mother I had gambled away my entire six-figure college fund. It was a calculated lie, and it cost me my identity. My parents didn't just cut me off, they erased me. They didn't call for my graduation. They didn't check if I had a roof over my head. For a decade, I was the family's cautionary tale, the daughter who threw her future away. For 10 years, I was a ghost at my own family's table. Then last week, my sister had her dream high society wedding. 200 guests watched as my father walked her down the aisle, the same man who sold my future to buy her silence. But when I walked into that reception in a gown that cost more than their house, the music stopped. And when I pressed play on a recording I'd kept for a decade, my mother's face went so pale I thought she'd faint. Before we delve into how I built an empire from the ground up, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Only if you believe that the truth is a debt that always gets paid. Drop your city and the current time in the comments. I want to see who is awake for this reckoning. In the Hollister house, everything had a proper place. My father, Caspian, was a financial consultant who believed every problem could be fixed if you just gave it a different name. If a bill was too high, it was an adjustment. If a mistake was made, it was a learning curve. He was the authority, the man who managed the family's life with the same cold logic he used to manage other people's money. He moved through our home in crisp white shirts and expensive watches, his presence commanding respect and silence. He was the kind of man who solved problems by reclassifying them, making sure the ledgers of our lives always looked balanced, even when they were empty. My mother, Reverie, was his perfect partner. She was the harmonizer, a woman who spent her days ironing out the wrinkles of our lives before we could even feel them. She wore pearl earrings and silk blouses in soft colors, always moving to smooth over any tension that dared to enter our home. If there was a heavy silence at the dinner table, she would quickly change the subject to something bright and happy, like a new flower in the garden or a neighborhood event. She didn't just want us to be a family, she wanted us to look like a perfect one to everyone else. Then there was Sable. She was 3 years older than me, golden and magnetic. Sable understood our parents better than anyone else did. She knew that they didn't really want the truth, they wanted a performance. As long as she smiled at the right times and stayed in the spotlight, she could do no wrong. She was the star of the Hollister show, and she played the part beautifully, using her charm as a tool to get exactly what she wanted. I was Indigo. I had steel blue eyes that missed nothing, though I rarely spoke about what I saw. While Sable was loud and bright, I was the girl who stayed in the shadows, turning every invisible wound into a reason to be excellent and quiet. I studied harder, moved softer, and learned to rely only on myself because I knew no one else was looking. I wore oversized sweaters and kept my hair in simple ponytails, trying to be as invisible as possible while observing the cracks in our perfect walls. The house was never cold, and that was the most dangerous part. There were warm meals, soft carpets, and polite conversations every single night. To anyone looking through the windows, we looked like the perfect American family. But behind the polished wood doors, the truth was being tucked away in drawers, and my future was already being treated like a number that could be moved around for someone else's benefit. We weren't a family built on love, we were a family built on appearances, and I was the only one who realized how fragile that really was. The difference between being disliked and being negotiable is a quiet kind of pain. In the Hollister house, I was never hated, I was just someone whose needs could be moved to the side if something more important came up. Usually, that something more important was my sister, Sable. I remember one Tuesday evening when I was 15. It was the night I finally won the regional math competition, an award I had worked toward for months. I came home holding a small gold trophy, my heart beating fast with a rare hope that this might be the night the spotlight shifted toward me. When I walked into the kitchen, the air was already heavy with a different kind of energy. Sable was standing on a chair while my mother pinned the hem of a new dress for a school play. My father was looking over her lines, nodding with a serious face as if she were performing on Broadway. The room had been reorganized to fit her needs, as it always was. My mother looked up and gave me a soft, polite smile. "That's very nice, Indigo," she said, her eyes already moving back to a loose thread on Sable's dress. My father gave me a quick nod. "Good job, kid. Put it on the shelf in the den." There was no cruelty in their voices, only a deep sense of accommodation for Sable. In that moment, I realized that my achievements were like furniture. They were nice to have, but they could be moved or hidden to make room for the main event. I didn't scream or cry. Instead, I went to the den and placed my trophy behind a large photo of Sable at her cheerleading camp. That was the day I decided to pour everything into my future. I knew I had to become someone whose value could not be quietly reclassified or pushed aside. I spent my nights studying until my eyes burned, fueled by a quiet fury that I turned into energy. I stopped looking for their approval and started looking for a way out. The college fund my grandmother left for me was my proof that I mattered. To me, that money was more than just dollars in a bank. It was a promise that I had an equal right to a big life. It was the one thing Sable couldn't charm her way into, or so I thought. I kept that belief close to my heart, just like the small silver star necklace I wore every day. I had bought that necklace for myself on the day I made the high honors list and realized no one in my house had even noticed the letter. I touched the star now, its cold metal a reminder that I was building a life they couldn't touch. I was a daughter who counted, even if I was the only one doing the math. Every secret has a sound, and Sable was always the best at listening for them. While I was tucked away in my room studying, Sable was moving through the house like a ghost. She didn't look for things to be helpful, she looked for things to use. One rainy afternoon, she found exactly what she needed. Our father had left his laptop open in his home office, and a single message popped up on the screen. It wasn't about money or work. It was a message from a woman my mother didn't know, filled with words a married man should never hear. Sable didn't cry when she saw it. She didn't run to tell our mother or demand that our father explain himself. Instead, she stood in the middle of the dark office and smiled. She realized that she wasn't just looking at a mistake, she was looking at a golden ticket. To Sable, our father's affair wasn't a tragedy that would break our family. It was leverage. She understood right then that she owned him. She could make him do anything, as long as she promised to keep his secret safe from our mother. Later that night, I walked past her bedroom and heard her talking on the phone. She was leaning against her pillows, twirling a lock of her hair, and laughing softly. "It was almost too easy," she whispered to her friend on the other end. "He left everything right there for me to find. He's so scared of Mom finding out that he'll give me whatever I want. I don't have to worry about anything anymore. It's not being mean, really. It's just being smart. Why should I suffer because he was messy?" She spoke with a casual pride, as if she had just won a prize rather than found a way to tear us apart. She called it practicality. She told herself that Indigo would figure things out because Indigo was the strong one, but Sable deserved to have things easy. She didn't see herself as a thief, she saw herself as a businessperson making a deal. I stood in the hallway, touching my silver star necklace, having no idea that my life had just changed forever. I thought the house was quiet because we were all safe. I didn't know that Sable was already planning how to spend my future. The trap was set, and the person I shared a bathroom with was the one holding the rope. I went to bed thinking about college, while Sable went to sleep thinking about how much my silence was worth to my father. She had the power now, and she was going to use every bit of it. The kitchen table had always been the place where my father made big announcements. It was polished and cold, much like the man sitting across from me. He was wearing one of his best suits, a deep navy blue that made him look like a man who was totally in control. He didn't look like a father about to break his daughter's heart, he looked like a businessman about to deliver a quarterly report. Indigo, he began, his voice steady and practiced. He had clearly rehearsed this speech in front of a mirror. There has been a change in our financial situation. The money your grandmother left for your college fund. It's gone. I made an investment that I thought would grow the fund for you, but the market turned. The word investment felt like a thick wall he was building between us. He spoke about it as if it were just bad luck, like a storm that no one could have seen coming. My mother stood in the doorway, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her pale green eyes were already moving away from me, looking at the floor or the wall, anywhere but at the discomfort in the room. She was already smoothing the wrinkles in her own mind, choosing to believe my father because it was easier than asking why he would risk my only chance at a future. I sat very still, my steel blue eyes locked on my father's face. I could feel a strange wrongness in the air. The story didn't fit the man. My father was a professional who never made sloppy mistakes with money. I asked 2 questions. Where did the money go exactly, and is there anything left? He answered both without flinching, his face a mask of calm regret. It's all gone, Indigo. I'm sorry. I did not cry. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break in a room where appearances mattered more than my life. I simply nodded, stood up, and walked to my room. That night, I sat on my bed with a calculator and a notebook. I started doing the math on student loans and part-time jobs, realizing that my path had just become a mountain. I held my silver star necklace in my fingers, the metal feeling like ice against my skin. There was something cold sitting in my chest, something I couldn't yet name. It wasn't just sadness, it was the feeling of being traded. I didn't know then that my college fund was the price of my father's secret, but I knew that the house I lived in was no longer a home. It was a place where I was the only one left to fight for my own survival. The decade that followed was not a movie montage of easy success. It was a long, hard climb through the mud. At 18, while Sable was picking out silk bedding for her dorm room, I was sitting in a small, dim financial aid office. I was signing papers that bound me to years of debt. My father's bad investment meant I started my adult life in a deep hole. I didn't have a safety net, so I had to build a floor with my own hands. One part-time job as a waitress quickly became 2 when I realized how expensive textbooks were. I worked late shifts until my feet burned and my eyes felt like they were full of sand. Then, I would go to the library and study until the sun came up. I pursued my business degree with a quiet, sharp focus. I knew I had no margin for error. A single failed class or a missed paycheck could end everything. I wasn't just a student, I was a soldier in a war for my own future. In 4 years, I earned that degree. I stood at my graduation alone, watching other families take photos and go out for expensive dinners. I didn't feel sad, I felt like steel. I took my first internship and turned it into a permanent job by simply refusing to be forgettable. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I learned how to speak the language of power, how to negotiate, and how to spot a lie from a mile away. By the time I was 24, I launched my own consulting firm. It wasn't fancy. I started in a shared office space that smelled like old coffee and burnt carpet. I had exactly one client, a second-hand desk I bought from a thrift store, and enough stubbornness to be dangerous. I didn't have my father's connections or my mother's charm, but I had a work ethic that none of them could understand. By 28, that one desk had grown into 3 offices. I was successful, but the cost was high. There were years of missed holidays, long nights of eating cold noodles, and a loneliness that sat deep in my bones. I had built an empire on the rubble of my past. I was no longer the girl who was negotiable. I was the woman who owned the room. I still wore the silver star necklace, but now it wasn't a reminder of what I lost. It was a badge of honor for everything I had won on my own. The truth rarely comes out all at once. Usually, it arrives in tiny pieces that don't seem to fit together until they do. For me, the first piece appeared during a rare weekend visit to my parents' house. My father had asked me to help him organize some old estate paperwork in his home office. He thought enough time had passed that I wouldn't care anymore, or perhaps he had simply forgotten what he was hiding. As I sat on the floor surrounded by dusty folders, I found a bank document from 10 years ago. It was a transfer record for a massive amount of money, the exact amount that was supposed to be in my college fund. But the money hadn't gone to a failed investment firm or a stock market trade. It had been transferred to a name I didn't recognize. The name belonged to a woman, and the account was personal, not professional. My heart began to thud against my ribs. I looked at the date. It was just 2 weeks before the kitchen table meeting where my father told me the money was gone. The numbers didn't match the story of a bad investment. This was a direct payment. It was a clean, deliberate move. Later that afternoon, I sat in the garden with my mother. The sun was warm, and everything looked peaceful, just like the lie we had lived for a decade. I tried to sound casual. "Mom, do you remember the name of that firm Dad used for my college fund?" I was just thinking about how much the market has changed since then. My mother froze. It was a tiny movement, a pause that lasted precisely half a second too long before she took a sip of her tea. Her pale green eyes flickered toward the house. "Oh, I don't really remember, Indigo. Your father handled all of those details. It's better to leave the past in the past, don't you think?" She didn't look at me. In the Hollister house, looking away was a survival skill. But I had spent a decade being highly observant because I had no one else to watch my back. I didn't push her. I didn't ask more questions. I simply nodded and changed the subject. I didn't send an email to my father or call my sister to scream. Instead, I went back to my life with a different quality of focus. I started a small notebook that I kept locked in my desk at work. Every strange memory, every weird date, and every name I found went into those pages. I wasn't angry yet, I was calculating. I was the girl with the steel blue eyes, and I was finally looking at the real architecture of my family. This was the quiet before the storm, and I was making sure I had every fact straight before I let the clouds break. The truth didn't just knock on my door, it arrived in an email from a ghost. It came from a girl named Chloe, who had been Sable's best friend back in high school. They had a falling out years ago, and Chloe had kept a secret as a weapon. She sent me an audio file with a short note: "You were always nice to me, Indigo. You deserve to know why your life got so hard." I sat in my quiet office, the city lights shimmering outside my window, and I pressed play. The sound of my sister's voice filled the room. She sounded younger, relaxed, and almost proud. I could hear the smile in her voice as she talked to Chloe. "It was so easy," Sable's voice said through the speakers. "I found the emails on Dad's computer. He's been seeing a woman in the city for months. When I confronted him, he looked like he was going to faint. I told him I wouldn't tell Mom, but only if he gave me Indigo's college money. I mean, why should that money sit in a bank when I can use it now?" There was a pause, and then she laughed. "He told Indigo it was a bad investment. She believed him. She's so resilient, you know? She always figures things out. She'll get some loans and be fine. But me? I need the best." It wasn't mean, Chloe. It was just smart. I traded a secret for a future. I sat perfectly still. I wasn't crying, and I wasn't shaking. I was in that deep, heavy stillness that happens when the world finally makes sense. Every late shift, every cold meal, and every lonely night had been a price paid for my father's shame and my sister's greed. They had traded my life to keep a lie alive. I took off my silver star necklace and held it in my palm. It felt small and heavy. I wasn't the girl who had been unlucky anymore. I was the woman who had been robbed by the people who were supposed to love her. Sable had been right about one thing: I was resilient. But she had made a mistake. She thought my resilience meant I would just take the hit and keep moving. She never imagined that I would use that same strength to make sure the truth came home. I listened to the recording a second time, memorizing the casual tone of her betrayal. Then, with steady fingers, I saved the file in 3 separate places: my personal cloud, a hidden drive, and a folder marked for the wedding. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a judge. The trial hadn't started yet, but I already had the evidence. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It was tucked inside a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name written in perfect, fancy handwriting. I stood at my kitchen counter, holding the heavy paper in my hands. The morning sun was streaming through the window, and the sound of the busy city was humming outside. It was a beautiful invitation for a beautiful wedding. Sable was finally getting the high society life she had always wanted, and she wanted me there to witness it. I looked at the gold-edged card for a long time. I had 2 choices. I could decline the invitation, send a nice gift, and write a polite note saying I was too busy with work. I could let the lie stay hidden under white lace and flowers. I could let us keep pretending that we were a normal family for one more day. But as I stood there, I thought about that cold morning at the kitchen table. I remembered my father's navy suit and his practiced voice. I thought about the stacks of loan papers I had signed alone, and the years I spent working until my bones ached. I remembered the second-hand desk in the small, smelly office and the 10 long years I had spent building a life out of nothing. Sable had built her happiness on a theft. She had treated my future like it was hers to spend. If I stayed away, I was agreeing to keep her secret. If I stayed away, the lie won. I set the envelope down on the counter. My hand didn't shake as I picked up my phone. I opened the wedding website and clicked the button to RSVP yes. I wasn't going because I missed them. I was going because the story needed an ending. 3 days later, I went to a small boutique and found the dress. It was an emerald green gown made of heavy satin. It was floor-length with a deep neckline and a subtle shimmer that caught the light whenever I moved. It was the dress of a woman who had succeeded, not a girl who had been cast aside. I didn't plan to scream or throw a glass. I didn't want to cause a loud scene that would make me look like the villain they had claimed I was. I was simply going to arrive, composed and complete. I was going to walk into that room and let the truth do its work. Truth is a strange thing. Once it is let out of the bag, it doesn't need any help to change the world. I was ready to let it speak. The ballroom was a sea of white roses and sparkling light. Huge crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, making everything look like a dream. Earlier that day, I had sat in the back of the church, watching in silence. I watched my father, Caspian, walk Sable down the aisle. He looked so proud in his tuxedo, and she looked perfect in her white lace gown. It was a strange, heavy feeling to watch the man who had robbed me lead the woman who had helped him toward her perfect, happy ending. Now, at the reception, the room was filled with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. 200 guests were dressed in their best clothes, celebrating the Hollister family's success. I sat at my table, the emerald green fabric of my dress shimmering like a dark jewel in a room full of pale colors. I felt like a stranger from a different world, but I remained perfectly still. The room went quiet as the toasts began. Sable stood up at the head table, looking beautiful and glowing. She raised her glass of champagne, her smile wide and bright. "I want to make a special toast," she said, her voice echoing through the speakers. "To my father. Dad, thank you for always being in my corner. Thank you for making sure I always had everything I needed to get where I am today." The guests broke into loud applause. People were smiling and nodding at my father, who sat there looking like a hero. I didn't join in. I slowly set my glass down on the white tablecloth without making a sound. I reached into my small clutch bag and pulled out the little Bluetooth speaker I had brought. With no drama and no announcement, I placed it right in the middle of the table. I didn't stand up to give a speech. I didn't scream. I simply pressed play. Suddenly, a different voice filled the ballroom. It was Sable's voice, but it wasn't the sweet one she used for the wedding. It was the relaxed, proud voice from the recording. It was so easy, the speaker played. "He's so scared of Mom finding out about the affair. I told him I'd only keep quiet if he gave me Indigo's college money." The applause died instantly. The room went from a celebration to a graveyard. As the recording continued, explaining exactly how my future had been traded for a secret, I looked across the room. I saw my father's face turn gray. I saw my mother's hand shake. The silence that followed the recording was total. It was a silence so heavy it felt like it would never end. The truth was finally in the room, and for the first time in 10 years, no one could look away. The silence in the ballroom was not empty, it was heavy and cold. It felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving everyone gasping. I didn't look at the guests. I watched my family. The collapse didn't happen with a scream, but through their faces. My mother, Reverie, looked like she was seeing a ghost. Her horror came in stages. First, she looked at my father, Caspian, searching for a lie she could believe. Then, she looked at Sable, whose white bridal gown now looked like a shroud. Finally, her eyes landed on me. In that moment, I saw the exact second she realized that the harmony she had protected for 30 years was a lie. Her marriage hadn't been built on love, it had been built on a transaction she never would have allowed. She looked at my father as if he were a stranger she had just met on the street. My father seemed to deflate. The man who always had a practiced answer and a sharp suit suddenly looked small. He didn't try to explain it away. There were no more investments to talk about. His moral debt had finally come due in front of everyone he knew. He sat there, his shoulders slumped, finally stripped of his authority. Sable was even worse. For the first time in her life, she had no script. There was no charm left to use and no way to spin the truth. She stood at the head table, her mouth open, but no words came out. The golden girl had turned to lead. She had no room left to move. I didn't wait for them to apologize. I knew that a sorry wouldn't give me back my 18-year-old self or the decade I spent struggling. I didn't need to hear them admit they were wrong, the room had already done that for them. I didn't deliver a grand speech or wait for the drama to explode. I simply stood up, smoothing the emerald fabric of my dress. With my spine straight and my silver star necklace resting at my throat, I walked out. I moved past the frozen guests and through the large doors into the cool night air. I walked toward the car I had paid for myself, toward the business I had built with my own hands, and toward a life that required no one's permission to exist. As I sat in the back seat of the car, I watched the city lights slide past the window like glowing ribbons. I saw my reflection in the glass, calm, composed, and finally unhurried. I was going home to a world I had created from nothing. They thought the fund was what I needed to survive. They were wrong. I needed the truth. And now, finally, it belongs to everyone in that room.